Good morning. I'm Ben Ayers. I'm Dean of the Terry College of Business, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's Terry Third Thursday. This is a great event that we have each month that brings together alumni, other business leaders, and students as well from the Terry College. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, our corporate sponsors, the Bank of North Georgia, as well as our media sponsors, the AJC and WABE Atlanta Public Broadcasting. So please join me in thanking them. I also want to mention next month's speaker will be Will Harris. He's the owner-operator of White Oak Pastures. And we also today have the pleasure of welcoming one of our undergraduate students here today. I teach a leadership class each semester, the Deer Run Fellows program, where we spend a week leadership retreat in South Georgia being sponsored by Doug Ivester at his plantation, Deer Run Fellows. And one of our students is here today, so Mary Pittman, if you'll. Mary will be graduating in the fall with a degree of risk management insurance, and she is outstanding. So if you haven't met her, I would you need to grab her afterwards. She's truly going to be a star. So let me introduce today's speakers. I'd like to introduce Warren Shiver and Michael Perla. They are both with Symmetrics Groups. Warren is the founder and managing partner, and Michael is a principal. Symmetrics Group is a management consulting company that's focused on end-to-end improvements with sales force effectiveness. Warren's passion is to help companies and people improve their sales performance and capabilities, and he has over 20 years of experience working for companies such as Accenture and OnTarget. He's helped grow Symmetrics Group into one of the U.S. fastest growing private companies in the U.S. Warren holds an MBA from Duke, as well as a bachelor's degree from another school in the city of Atlanta, who doesn't have a very good football team. So, Michael specializes in providing actual insights into marketing and sales organizations to help them increase their pipelines and their productivity. He helps lead, scope, and execute sales transformation efforts, and also has over 20 years of experience in sales effectiveness consulting and strategic marketing experience. Michael holds 2 graduate degrees in psychology from the University of Georgia, as well as an MBA from Georgia State. Together, they have co-authored a book, which we've got a number of copies here, Salesforce Transformation. They're going to speak to us today on growing revenues, the challenges of transforming sales, what you need to know. So please join me in welcoming Michael and Warren.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean Ayers. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How many of you are currently in a sales position or lead a sales team at your organization? Just show of hands. Okay. How many of you who didn't raise your hand work for an organization where you have a direct sales force that's responsible for bringing in a large majority of the revenues? A few more hands, right? So most of us are familiar with sales organizations, and as Dean Ayers said, Michael and I'm Warren Shiver, this is Michael Perla. We're passionate about sales, for better or for worse. And one of the interesting things we find about sales is constantly living on an edge. So by definition, salespeople are constantly on the edge of being fired, right? There's a clear scorecard. It's, for most of us, it's binary. You either win or lose the deal, right? And if you look at some of the statistics for sales, it's interesting, right? So average quota attainment for a sales professional in 2015 was 58%, right? If you're a Major League Baseball player, if you're Steph Curry for the NBA, a three-point average, that's Hall of Fame level, right? But for the average salesperson, hey, about half of hitting your number, not so good. So as a result, another quick statistic, you'll see the average tenure for a sales leader is now about 1.5 years. So a challenging profession, to say the least, right? And finally, if you look overall at a macro level, since the Great Recession, sales attainment for sales organizations overall was slowly increasing, but it's certainly dropped in the last couple of years. So what's interesting is, for most of us, we chose this career, right? There's 100,000 college graduates this year that will go into their first job in sales. And for what Michael and I are motivated by is, how do you shape those behaviors from a sales perspective, whether you've been in sales for a year, 5 years, or a couple of decades? And so that's our topic today, is the 7 steps to sales transformation, and how do you drive a change with a sales organization to take the hit rate from 50% to maybe 60, 70, 80, 90%. Okay? So you may be thinking, well, okay, great. Why another book on sales? Right? If you go to Amazon and Google the word, or not Google, if you put in the word sales into their search criteria, you get over 430,000 hits. There are a lot of things written about sales. How to sell, sales techniques, sales methodologies, how to be a sales leader, run an organization, how to interview for a job in sales. So why another book on sales? Well, Michael and I, again, were passionate about what drives change, and we thought, why not build on some of the lexicon that's out there around books that, how do you build a great team or a great organization? So books like Built to Last, Good to Great, some of the classic best-selling books around how do you build great companies, and certainly great teams as well, and couple some of those concepts with things like how do you manage change, right? So changing behavior, changing habits, but then do it in a pragmatic, practical way, grounded by some scientific research. And you see the quote there by Steve Young. Steve ran the $5 billion enterprise sales team for Verizon before retiring, and he lectures on sales at another university in town that I didn't go to, that Michael went to, I guess, that'll remain nameless. But I think one of the interesting things, I think the Carey College is doing a good job with this as well, is we're seeing increasingly, not only in our profession, but in universities and undergrad and graduate programs, there's much more of a scientific focus on the profession of selling. We think that certainly bodes well for some of the statistics that we showed you earlier. So at a quick glance, here's the book. And it forms the basis of the placemat that you see in front of you at your tables. If you're a visual person, we've got some visual notes for you to follow along. And this is what's in the book, and we'd love for you to check it out afterwards. But don't just take our word for it. What you'll see in the book is we did 2 years of research. So we built our findings on not only our experience and our clients' experiences, but also went out and interviewed and surveyed more than 100 organizations, both domestically and globally, talked to more than 50 sales leaders and executives, and really built on a wealth of experience at organizations you can see up here, some leading brand names, companies that certainly were quote unquote built to last. So simply, here are the 7 steps. You can look at that and say, well, that's great, but those look like 7 common steps for any type of change. What's so special about these 7? So let us drill down and give you a little bit of information around how you use these and apply these specifically to the world of sales. And it all begins with your drivers and a fundamental question, right? Do you need to transform or just tweak your sales organization or your sales team, right? Are you hitting 50% of your target or 90% and you just need an incremental improvement, right? So we define Salesforce transformation as fundamentally changing the way a sales team sells, right? This is a big deal. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something you can read a book about in terms of sales skills, or even this book and just apply and flip a switch, so there's no silver bullet, so to speak. But it typically requires significant time, money, and resources and staying power, and that goes in contrast to the statistic I showed you where the typical sales leader is in her job for about 1.5 years. So there's quite the trade-off there, which we'll talk about. So the first question is, really, do you need to transform? And you can answer that by thinking about, well, what's your drivers for change? So step 1, what's really driving a need to change within your sales team or within your company? Here's some of the common drivers we saw and found in our research. And so not surprisingly, more than half of companies that embark on a sales transformation aren't hitting their number, right? Again, back to that clear scorecard, hey, we're not achieving the revenue goals that we like or even the profitability goals, so we need to make some fundamental changes. I think we also see, if you can see up there, in our survey, only 3% of sales transformations were driven by M&A events. We think that's relatively underrepresented. So if you think about recent headlines, Newell Rubbermaid here in Atlanta, they're buying Jarden Consumer. Think about the implications for those sales teams, right? If Michael Pearl and I are both in Atlanta, let's say we're both calling on Home Depot for those companies, hey, do we still need both Michael and Warren, right? So how are they going to integrate those two sales organizations with their customers? And then increasingly, and a number of you are probably in this world. I know, Matt, we were talking earlier about private equity businesses. And if you think about private equity businesses, typically many of those have grown through acquisition over the years. And we find that some of those companies today are a portfolio of companies, and they're transitioning to a portfolio of brands. So another example would be Cox Auto here in Atlanta with Auto Trader, Dealertrack, Manheim, some major brands, major companies. They're looking at ways at an enterprise level to have a single integrated face to the customer from a sales and a service and support perspective. So we see that as some common drivers of change within a sales team. And then the next question you want to ask about drivers in terms of what's driving your change is, how compelling is the need to change? Right? So a quick story to illustrate this. There's a change management guru here in Atlanta named Daryl Conner. He wrote a book called Managing at the Speed of Change in 1992. Great book if you haven't seen it. And he coined this term called the burning platform. And he tells this story in the book, and it was this. He was watching CNN in 1988, and they're interviewing a survivor from this oil field platform disaster in the North Sea. It's a gentleman named Andy Makin. He was the superintendent on the platform, and he was awakened from his sleep in his bunk by massive explosions. So he stumbles out, he's injured, he gets to the edge of the platform, he's looking down 15 stories into the water, and all he sees is debris, oil starting to come to the surface, catch on fire. And so the interviewer's like, well, Andy, what did you do? And he's like, I jumped. And he's like, well, why did you jump? The water was so cold that if you weren't rescued in 20 minutes, you would have died. And he said, well, simply, it was either jump or fry. So that's a little heavy for 7:45 in the morning. But the point is, how hot is if the metaphor works, how hot is your platform for change? In Andy's case, he looked around at his current environment and he said, hey, I'm facing certain death, or I could take a leap and have a chance of life or success. And for most of us, obviously, we're not facing those kind of dire circumstances in our professions, thankfully, day in and day out. But it is an apt metaphor to think about what's your driving need for change. In our case, with a sales organization, but really in any change overall, personal or professional. So that's the major question you want to think about as you kick off. I think the next question around drivers, and again, this is on the placemat as well, is how large is the opportunity? Again, are we talking about a 5% change in performance or a 50% change, right? And that's going to shape what kind of transformation investment and how the scope of what you're going to drive. And then finally, can you get all the stakeholders internally to agree? And we'll talk more about this morning, but certainly sales can't go it alone. And we'll talk about other business partners like HR, marketing, IT, that have a strong role in supporting the sales team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Perla. Michael's going to talk about how do you craft a vision for sales transformation.
Sure, great. So vision. This is a classic picture. Some of you probably recognize it. There's a row of mainframes, and the language is from a book by Lou Gerstner, right, the former CEO and chairman of IBM, who says elephants can't dance, which he was referring to IBM at the time. Some of you probably either maybe experienced it or ex-IBMers. There's many of them in Atlanta. And so basically, for the elephants, he was referring to IBM because at the time, in 1993, when he came on board, it had an $8 billion loss, which was one of the largest losses in corporate America at the time. And they were sort of slow, lumbering, and essentially bloated portfolio, selling commoditized hardware. And then they needed to shift their strategy to selling more software, solutions, services, right? So essentially, this is a classic transformation story, and sales transformation was a key piece of that, right? Different conversations, different go-to-market strategy, right? They went from $30 billion market capitalization in 1993 to $170 billion in 2002 when he left. And then there was Pal Manzano, right, who bought PwC, large PricewaterhouseCoopers, large management consulting firm, and then they started to shift their business and transform. And one of the things they did was they developed a program called the Signature Selling Method, SSM, which was 3 learning partners. Warren and I both worked for 2 of them. that brought together this methodology around selling solutions and services in a bundle in solving business challenges versus just putting out hardware, which was becoming commoditized. So we were talking for this presentation, and this was a story that was intimate with sales transformation and a business transformation. So the transformation dilemma, right? So for other functions within a company, think of accounting or finance. You have FASB, SEC, Congress makes a change. We can think of Sarbox, right, where you have to change. Kind of begrudgingly, you don't want to change. Sometimes they call it the Consultant Act or what have you. But there's a change there. Whereas in sales, right, imagine, and some of you don't have to imagine, that you're the head of a large sales organization. You're the chief sales officer, right? And you need to change a group of people that are entrepreneurial, independent, self-allocate their time, right? That's challenging. There's an intrinsic resistance to change. They're out there every day selling themselves, selling their offering, selling who they are, right? You got to kind of like them and like what they're selling. And there's a dilemma there around change management and changing this group of essentially entrepreneurial folks who frankly love freedom, right? Don't want to be micromanaged. There is a certain personality around selling, whether you're hunting or farming or what have you, and there's a dilemma there. So one of the things here is one of the questions that we ask, and this is on the placemat as well, is what does your ideal customer look like, right? So we do this with a lot of our clients. What are the characteristics? What's the persona? How do they look? What are the conversations I need to have? What resonates with them? Value propositions, et cetera. And then how do you drive value for your customers, right? What do they value? The sales professional for a business-to-business enterprise sale is critical, right? It's not just brand pull. They have to pull it together. They have to sell the value, right? Actually, that's the number one thing that sales teams look at is, can someone sell the value so your margins aren't compressed, it's not commodity, and you can differentiate against the competition. So this is also a piece we can look at. I mentioned IBM. We can look at other companies we've worked with. What's your go-to-market? What channels do you go through? A lot of our clients go through other channels. They go through partners. They got distributors, dealers, value-added resellers, and others that they can cover the market in a different way and maybe just have their top teams manage their strategic accounts, right? We see this quite common today as it changes the cost of sales mix. And then we talked about desired conversations. Won't go into that in depth. And then the other piece here is your case for change, right? In any company, there's an alternate use of capital. So a sales transformation is competing, right, against other projects and programs. So one of the things that we've seen, and here's a statistic about importance of selling in internally, is 70%, this was some research from McKinsey a few years ago, 70% of transformations in large change efforts fail. So as Warren said, significant time, money, and resources and attention, right? And if it fails, there's a lot of scar tissue in companies. And sales folks typically are highly skeptical, hard to sell to, similar to consultants, tough group. So one of the things you need to do is, we talk about in the book, is you need to treat the sales transformation like a full-blown sales campaign internally. So what would you do to win a large deal, right? You'd have an opportunity assessment. You'd have a sales strategy. You'd have a relationship strategy. You understand the politics of the organization, of how decisions are made, right? You'd have some tactics that line up. I mean, a large deal can take 3 to 6 months, can take longer if it's an outsourcing deal, could take a year plus, could cost $100,000 plus in cost of sales, right? It's a significant effort, and internally, you want to do the same thing, right? Because you're competing with other resources internally. So we talk about basically treating it like a full-blown sales campaign. So the next thing we're going to talk about, Warren's going to talk about, is building support across the organization and building alliances to get it done.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So Michael said, who else needs to be involved? When you think about the sales transformation, one of the things that we've found is sales can't be an island. So sales can't go alone when it comes to sales transformation. So what other functional areas are relied upon from a sales perspective to drive a sales transformation? So not surprisingly, you'll see some of the common groups up here on the screen. And if you think about it, this makes intuitive sense, right? If you want your sales organization to have a different conversation with your customers, they might need new value propositions. They might need updated messaging and case studies and examples that they can talk about. So certainly you're relying on marketing for that. You might need new skill sets, right? Which could require different recruiting profiles, different way you pay people, which we were talking about with Matt earlier as well, right? In terms of compensation. That's going to require your HR business partner to be involved as well. So when you think about a Salesforce transformation, and many of you may experience this if you're not in sales and working with sales teams, certainly you have a large role to play in supporting the success of a sales organization and a sales transformation. So I think a key question is thinking about what key functions are involved. One of the executives we interviewed was Everett Hill, used to be an executive with Coca-Cola Enterprises here in Atlanta. He's now a consultant. And he was charged with the sales transformation internally for CCE's 1,200 person strong on-premise sales team. And they were really looking to make some changes around what they called the look of success and equip their sales and account managers to go into a 7-Eleven, a Walmart, anywhere you're selling Coca-Cola products and really optimize, if you will, the look of success from a retailer perspective. One of the things he told us that he quickly realized was, hey, we can't confuse selling with delivering. So I can equip the sales team with all the skills, the conversational capability to go in and have this conversation and make basically a promise. But if as a company we can't deliver on that promise, we're going to be out of luck, right? So that spawned a distribution transformation project internally that then ultimately enabled the sales transformation. And we see that time and time again. In the book, we highlight an example with Central Garden and Pet. They're a $2 billion CPG firm. If you go into a Home Depot or Lowe's this spring and you buy Ant Killer, Amdro, another thing you didn't think you'd hear at 8 o'clock in the morning, Ant Killer, right? But they have brands like Amdro, Pennington Lawn and Grass Seed, which is over here in Madison, Georgia, some lawn and garden brands. Same thing for them. Their sales transformation was highly dependent upon their ability to transform their supply chain organization. So think about the other organizations as you're getting into step 5, which is building a roadmap for change, right? What's our plan that's going to get us there? One of the stories we'd like to tell about the plan is we have a personal professional mentor named Bill Frank. He's retired, lives down in Amelia Island, Florida. He was an ex-IBM, if you can remember this, and this is dating me, Wang, digital equipment sales rep and manager before becoming a consultant and trader. But before that, he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He was a captain in the U.S. Army, and he was one of the first pilots to fly the Apache and the Cobra attack helicopters. Won 2 distinguished flying crosses. So I say all that to say this is one serious individual. And one of the things that he taught us was, he's like, look, when you're on the ground and you have a map, and the map and the terrain differ, go with the terrain, right? So one of the things we learned and we took away is, plan is great, but it's really the value is in the planning and the exercise of putting together the plan, but you have to be able to adjust. So when you think about Salesforce transformations, think about these 4 components at a high level, right? Michael talked about go-to-market strategy. So what's my sales structure that I need? How do I equip that team with the right processes and tools? Many of you, if you're in sales or around sales, are familiar with tools like Salesforce.com, those type of enabling tools. How do we enable the people from a skills perspective? And then maybe most importantly, how do we equip our sales leaders and managers to model, coach, and reinforce what goods looks like, right? So it's easy for the consultants to come in and say, here's what you should do, but day in and day out, it's the sales leaders that are going to sustain changes in behaviors that you want to drive. Okay, so that takes us through the roadmap step. And then Michael, you're going to wrap it up with implement and sustain, and then we'll talk about some CSFs and finish it up.
Yeah, sure. So implement, the key piece here, it's the 6th step, right? Wow. Okay, it's the sixth step. Yeah. So, man, Siri's on me. So it's not the first, right? A lot of companies start with it as the first. They don't do that up front. So as part of our survey, we asked the folks, 100 plus sales organizations, what would you have done differently, right? So if you had to do it again, what would you have done differently? And the key response was, I would have done a lot of this upfront work. I would have built alliances. I would have built support. I wouldn't have gone it alone, right? We had one organization, large organization in Atlanta, Fortune 100, and they were on their third sales transformation because they were trying to go it alone. They didn't build that support. So they went essentially straight to implement and didn't do those other steps. Yes, the sixth step. Okay. All right, I didn't hear anything. This was a highly articulate sales executive that we talked to, and he had this term of the slog of implementation. So in our mind, and this probably isn't, you don't have to imagine too far on this one, it is sitting in a windowless conference room, poring over spreadsheets, looking at who's got this territory, how do we reassign, how do we rack and stack our folks, right? Some people can make this change and sell the full portfolio. Others cannot. So the slog of implementation is, one, there's not a silver bullet, and it's not pretty, right? I mean, we all know pouring through lines of an Excel spreadsheet is always fun. It's similar to most lawyers and doctors and others. It's not what's on TV, and it's always fun. There's lots of other pieces involved. So the slog of implementation is essentially there isn't a silver bullet here, and it does take time to get results. So these are some of the things we talk about to transform. And I think we've mentioned a number of them. I'll just focus on one or two. So measurement, and this is in the book. We had one client we talked to, and he mentioned, and this was the one who had a number of sales transformation, and they had 180 KPIs, so key performance indicators. I'm not sure how you have 180 key performance indicators, but they had 180 KPIs. And they went through a balanced scorecard process, which some of you are familiar with, right? You kind of narrow down to leading and lagging indicators. You try to get to about 25. They got to 7 in terms of their sales transformation. And they looked at things like wallet share and revenue growth and in renewals in terms of getting those time and time again, year over year. So they really narrowed down what they were trying to do. So measurement, we talk about in the book. Yes, you want to measure. You don't need 180 KPIs because then you're either dizzy or it doesn't really matter. But that's a key piece, right? Result metrics and process metrics. And then the other piece we talk about is pilot and iterate. So there's nothing like, hey, we got results, we went in a division, and here were the results. Let's value strap that, get the value, and then we can use that to sell internally. Similar to what you would do if you were selling. Proof of concept. Let's try either software, let's try something else, let's get the value from it and use that as part of our internal sales campaign. So I want to do an exercise. So I will get some of you out of your seats. So here's the exercise. So I want you to think about last year in January of 2015, some of you made New Year's resolutions. So everyone who made a New Year's resolution, please stand up. You made a New Year's resolution in 2015. Come on, some of you made New Year's resolutions. I know it. I can hear I wanted to exercise, I wanted to lose something, etc. So if you made a New Year's resolution in 2015, okay. So after a month, if you were adhering to your New Year's resolution, I want you to stay standing. If you weren't, please sit down. Okay, all right, I want be purely honest. So you have the idea. So after 3 months, so 1 quarter, you were still adhering to your New Year's resolution, please stay standing. If you weren't, please sit. Okay? I think you understand that the process. So 6 months, stay standing or sit. 9 months, 1 year. Excellent.
Ooh,
All right. We have a parting gift. It is not a 5 series.
You probably don't need this if you're still standing. Mayor. Congrats.
That's a good point. Excellent. Thank you. So, so I think people get the point, right? Very visual. It's tangible. You see it. It's hard to change, right? So one last stat before Warren kind of finishes us up. So 1 out of 4 people who have a heart attack don't make any change. So, I mean, talk about a compelling event. I might die, right? I think a heart attack, I don't know the exact stat, but I think 50% do die. Again, wow, this is great in the morning. Sorry about that. But the point is, change is hard. We know the diet statistics, the exercise stats. But wow, talk about a compelling event or a burning platform. You almost died, and 1 out of 4 do absolutely nothing. So sustainment is hard. I think we're there.
Yep.
Sir?
So to wrap up, we also found a couple of success factors. And as Michael said earlier, some of these have been threaded through. But one to highlight is, not surprisingly, is leadership. So if you think about, again, back to some of the great business books, Good to Great, Built to Last, some of those, they certainly highlight sustained leadership and authentic leadership, or if you're Jim Collins, level 5 leadership, whatever you want to call it, as a key thread. But again, we see that certainly the classic, hey, let's have a sales meeting in Atlanta or Orlando or Las Vegas, head of sales does a rah-rah speech. That's not the kind of leadership we're talking about. We're talking about sustained, authentic, and the leadership that, again, scales down to your first and second level sales leaders. So I think that's a key thing to keep in mind. And then finally, in the book, we talk about sales transformations in the future. So what are some of the trends that are going to affect sales organizations going forward, like the Internet of Things, big data, millennials like Mary joining the workforce, right? How do we leverage millennial talent in our sales organizations, and what changes do we need to make to accommodate this new growing demographic? So we've enjoyed being here. Dean Ayers, thanks again for having us. I think we've got a few minutes for questions, but a quick thanks to Scott Russell for teeing this up. If you like what you heard, thank him. If you didn't, we'll exit quickly. And then a shout out to Michael Taylor in the back. Hi, Michael. Michael helped us. He's with Simple Mind. He helped us put together the graphics for the presentation. And then a quick plug for the sponsors, Linda and Michelle, who are our bankers. So again, if you like what you saw, thank you. If you didn't, I'll be looking for a new line of credit. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Dean Ayers, to you or to the group for questions.
We've got time for questions, and there's a microphone, so if you'll wait for the microphone, because we are recording this.
Talk for a minute about maybe some best practices you've seen in aligning a sales force within a highly matrix organization. Too early for that, sorry.
You got the silver bullet for that one?
You're making us think. I don't know that I do.
I mean, you know, we see a lot of matrix organizations. I think, you know, the whole cadence around keeping in contact. So, you know, sales management cadence, right? I have you know, I have a weekly meeting. I have pipeline reviews. I have win-loss reviews. I have forecasting and so forth. For matrix organizations, that, you know, how do you stay connected if I have dotted lines and so forth, and I have hard lines to different folks? There is a higher coordination cost and collaboration cost, right, in terms of doing that. We've typically seen, how do I get, you know, cross-functional groups together, whether it's advisory. We have monthly meetings to stay in contact to make sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. I mean, there is you know, you have a matrix for a reason, because typically the complexity of the organization, and as you know, there's complexity, coordination, and collaboration costs to keep that going. So we've just seen, you know, how do you standardize this cadence around meetings and staying in contact?
I think, John, quickly, I think you have to speak the same language. So I think even in a matrix organization, it's really important to have a common sales process, vernacular. So when Michael says, hey, I think this deal's at 20%, and I say it's at 20%, as an example, we mean the same thing. So I think that's important as well.
but no silver bullet there. Yeah.
Hey, Warren, you talked about the tenure of a VP of sales for a year and a half.
Yep.
I'm not in sales, I'm on the finance side, but all the sales talk I've heard is about the relationship building sales process. How do you reconcile building relationship with a year and a half tenure for a VP of sales?
Yeah, good question, Matt. So I think, and this is a good gross generalization, but I think increasingly, so relationships are necessary but not sufficient for success in sales. So, maybe 30 years ago, the Willie Loman days, death of a salesman days, relationship was huge, right? And you could sell on relationship and your own personal brand and gravitas. I think increasingly, if you read books like The Challenger Sale, which is another great book, sales book that's on the marketplace, increasingly buyers are educated, right? Think about buying a car today as an example. We all walk into the dealerships, we pretty much know what we want. And you can go online and configure what you want and come into the dealer and then shop that around. So the days of a relationship in that selling model certainly look a little bit differently in terms of the role. So I think that's important, but I think also even with sales VPs that are turning over, many of them stay in the same industry, so they do have portable relationships that can certainly sustain him or her, multiple careers and multiple jobs.
Hey, thank you guys. What are your thoughts on value engineering and value engineering automation? That seems to be a growing topic in sales, and how does that fit into kind of your construct and whether you think that's a successful strategy or not?
Yeah, we've seen particularly some of the software companies, right, who've done that. SAP, I can think of. I was at Siebel for 5 years. I hit the wrong time though. I think my options were at $100 and it sold at $12 a share. So that was perfect timing. But yeah, we've particularly seen that around some of the software pieces, and particularly for those buyers around designing and understanding value and that's going to drive in their company. It's such a key part of the sale, right? And so they were doing a lot of stuff up front, before they sold anything. I mean, at Siebel, we'd go in. I remember Caterpillar bought $12 million of software. It was a 96% discount on license revenue. But yeah, there was a whole team. I was part of the team that went in and did this whole sort of value engineering, did a kind of an ROI analysis that was very deep, that was on our dime. But in order to sell that and to do a proof of concept, it had to be done because everybody else was doing it as well. I mean, I haven't, we've had some of our clients do it at some level, but I think it's only going to become more important. I think as Warren said, I mean, if you can't bring value, right, it's all about insight selling today. Yeah, you might like me, that's interesting, but Michael, I got to go back and justify this project and this spend to the board, to my CFO, to others in the organization. I need strong justification. I mean, the language of the boardroom is numbers, right? At the end of the day, however you put it. And so that's got to be a language that's there. I don't know anything you'd add, Warren.
The frustration I find and my colleagues find in the business I'm in, which is consulting, is we're largely having to now go through supply chain organizations. And this may be a follow-on to the value question, but even though the supply chain organizations say they look at things from a value perspective, it certainly seems like they're more interested in, well, who's the low-cost bidder. My guess is you guys are experiencing this with your clients. What sort of advice and guidance do you have to deal with this dynamic?
Yeah, I think we certainly experience this being in professional services ourselves as well. I think your experience may vary, but I think once you get to the procurement organization, it's certainly going to be about price and terms and conditions. So you have to think about the sale, obviously, as have started much earlier, and how have you, back to the value question, how have you set the value or the business value with your business sponsors? And Scott, in this case, leverage that when you get to procurement. So there's going to be, we work with clients, we do this ourselves. There's certainly going to be some give to gets when you get to procurement and some non-negotiables as well. But if you get to procurement or an RFP process and you don't have great coaches and sponsorship on the business side, then it's going to be a tough conversation.
there a certain step that organizations find to be the most difficult across the board? And if there is, does it vary at all by industry?
Why don't you take the industry piece? I'll give you a chance to think about it. Good question, Mary. I think as Michael said, I think we see organizations struggle in that they typically start, as Michael said, with step 6, right? That again, the average VP of sales at the tenure is about a year and a half. Bless you. It takes time to do this right if you need to do it right. Everybody's looking for a quick solution. Investors, CEO, leaders, and that's not surprising, right? So I think the fundamental challenge we see is it's hard to do steps 1 through 5 right and have the luxury of time to do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking across industry. I mean, and we work across industry. So we've done hospitality, high tech, telco, manufacturing. It is interesting just as we've worked with a number of companies that they're kind of do-it-yourselfers, right? And there's a lot of engineers in the company, which, again, very bright. And so, that can be a challenge in terms of, one, selling to them, and also a lot of times they'll start it and kind of go to implement and do a lot of the upfront and want to get almost in too far, too deep early. I think we talked about relationships, and they are important. We know in a lot of companies there's dueling P&Ls, right? And there's different BUs. We're working with one now. They have like 10 strategic business units, and they're all kind of entities unto themselves, and there's a lot of M&A. And so they don't want to upset the apple cart. So it's maybe more characteristics of the company versus the industry per se. And that's something we really need to look at. Because I can tell you, I mean, literally, we're in something right now, and we're talking to all the VPs of sales in all these different SBUs, trying to build relationships and alliances. And we have some interviews later today. So I think it's more the characteristics of the organization than it is industry per se.
So given all those challenges that you have there, speed is what everybody expects today. What's more important, leadership, strategy, or the right sales force? Knowing that the pressure's there to achieve that speed quick.
I like that. I think the answer is yes. That's good. It's also the consultant answer, which is it depends, right? If I'm forced to choose, though, I'd start with leadership. I think most companies aren't going to wholesale turn over their sales force. You're not going to fire everybody tomorrow and rehire a sales team. You're not going to dramatically change your product or solution overnight either. So I think the one thread we saw that goes through our research in this project, and I think we saw in those business books that we referenced, having the right leadership it won't cure all, but ultimately is a critical linchpin.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say the same. I mean, and it's funny is the power of the personality, right? Everybody's looking for the perfect CEO or what have you, is pretty powerful. And I mean, I mentioned IBM. You think of Gerstner and so forth, and yeah, there were a lot of people that were let go. He made some major different bets. And what was funny, he said, I don't want a vision. I want to get out there and do it. You think of Microsoft right after Ballmer left, and different personality, but clearly a shift in the business. So I think leadership can make some major capital reallocation decisions. And if we think of strategy, right, it's developing and deploying your scarce resources in a risk-adjusted manner. Leadership has those purse strings. Yeah. Not that the others aren't important, but yeah.
Any other questions?
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, before you depart, I know that you need a little more red and black.
Can you put that on the football field for us?
Yeah, well,
Wow,
yes, we expect that's on your desk.
that's weighty.
It will be.
But thank you all for sharing today. That's obviously an important topic for all businesses, and we really appreciate that. I did want to point out we actually have a couple other students that were here today. Robin Haas is another Deer Run Fellow, graduating this May in accounting. And then Abby is also here. Abby, raise your hand. Any other MBA students that are here in the audience? Okay, so we've got some MBAs. So on your way out, your task is to meet at least one of our students. The other task is if you'd like for us to pay for your parking, we'll validate that on your way out. So thank you so much for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you in March as well. Have a great day.